The morning had started like any other Tuesday, mundane and unremarkable in the way that most Tuesdays tend to be. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, scrolling through emails on my laptop, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my wife Claire. She said she was too sick to go into work and needed me to drop off her resignation letter at her boss's house, since Mr. Patterson lived only about 12 minutes from where we were, and apparently preferred handling sensitive HR matters in person rather than over email. That was what she had always told me about him anyway, that he was old-fashioned. A man of tradition. A man who valued the personal touch. I remember thinking how odd it was that she needed to resign in person rather than simply sending an email. But Claire had always been particular about professional courtesy. She had typed the letter herself the night before, printed it, and sealed it in a cream-coloured envelope with Mr. Patterson's name written in her careful handwriting on the front. She had left it on the kitchen counter before going to bed early, claiming a migraine was coming on. So there I was, doing what any devoted husband would do, picking up the envelope, grabbing my car keys, and heading out into the grey October morning to take care of something for the woman I had been married to for 7 years. I want to be honest about something. It would be too easy, too convenient, to claim that I had no suspicions before that morning. The truth is that things between Claire and me had been quietly deteriorating for the better part of a year. There were the late evenings she spent at the office on a project that never seemed to conclude. There were the weekends where she was distracted and distant, staring at her phone with an expression I could not quite read, then turning the screen face down when I sat beside her. There were the small but accumulating silences between us, the kind that do not feel like comfortable pauses, but rather like walls being constructed, brick by invisible brick. I had told myself I was imagining it. I had told myself that every long marriage goes through dry stretches, that stress at work explains a great deal, that suspicion is a poison a man can mix for himself without any help from anyone else. I had made a deliberate choice to trust her, because that is what you do when you love someone. You choose to believe the best until you cannot anymore. I drove to Mr. Patterson's house through quiet residential streets lined with oak trees just beginning to shed their leaves. The neighborhood was comfortable and well kept, the kind of place where houses had wide front porches and two-car garages. Mr. Patterson's home was a large colonial-style property at the end of a cul-de-sac, distinguished from its neighbors by a pair of stone pillars flanking the driveway and a well-maintained garden. I parked at the curb rather than pulling into the drive, out of some instinct toward politeness. I picked up the envelope from the passenger seat and walked up the stone path to the front door. The morning was cool and quiet. Somewhere nearby, a dog was barking lazily. I remember noticing that the curtains in the front window were drawn, which seemed slightly unusual given that it was nearly 9 o'clock in the morning. I knocked. There was a long pause, long enough that I was about to knock again. Then the door opened. I will spend the rest of my life trying to find the words for what I felt in that particular fraction of a second, and I suspect I will never fully succeed. Because standing in the doorway of her boss's house at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday when she was supposed to be home sick in bed was my wife. Claire. She was wearing a man's dress shirt, white, too large for her, buttoned only part way up so that the collar hung loose around her shoulders. Her hair was dishevelled in a way that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with something I did not want to name. Her face, in the moment before recognition arrived, carried an expression I had never seen on it before. A softness, a warmth, an easiness that I realized, with something like grief, had been absent from the way she looked at me for a very long time. And then recognition hit her, and that expression vanished, replaced by something cold and complex and terrible. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked at her. She looked at me. The cream-coloured envelope with Mr. Patterson's name on it was still in my hand. "Nathan," she said. That was all. Just my name. The way someone says a word when every other word has abandoned them. I heard movement inside the house, footsteps on a hardwood floor, and then Mr. Patterson appeared behind her in the hallway. He was in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the kind of assured, commanding presence that I supposed had made him successful in his career. He was wearing a bathrobe. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts shock and guilt, and underneath both of those things I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like relief. The relief of a man who has been waiting for a particular kind of reckoning to finally arrive. I stood there on the doorstep for what felt like several minutes, but was probably no more than 10 or 15 seconds. I was aware of an extraordinary stillness inside myself, as though the emotional earthquake had struck, but the shaking had not yet begun. My mind was running very clearly and very coldly, like a stream in winter. I held out the envelope. "She sent me to deliver this," I said. My voice was calm. I was proud of that, though pride is perhaps the wrong word for it. Claire reached out and took the envelope from me. Her fingers brushed mine, and I stepped back instinctively, as though the contact had burned. I turned around and walked back down the stone path to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a moment with the engine off. Through the windshield I could see the front door of the house, which had been closed. The curtains in the front window were still drawn. The oak trees along the street continued shedding their leaves with complete indifference. The dog somewhere nearby had stopped barking. I started the engine and drove home. The days that followed had a peculiar, underwater quality, as though I were moving through something thicker than air. Claire came home that evening. I do not know what conversation she had expected, perhaps a confrontation full of raised voices and thrown accusations and weeping confessions. What she got instead was me sitting at the kitchen table, very quiet, with a glass of water in front of me. She sat across from me. She had changed her clothes. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than usual, as though something that had been animating her had gone out of her. "I don't know where to start," she said. "Then don't," I told her. "Not tonight." She nodded and went upstairs. We existed in that limbo for about a week, polite, careful, communicating in the functional language of people who share a space but no longer share themselves. Who wants coffee? The dry cleaning needs to be picked up. There is a bill due on Friday. We were two strangers performing the role of a married couple for an audience of no one, because we had no children, a fact that I was profoundly grateful for during those particular days. She told me eventually. Not everything, I suspect, but enough. She and Mr. Patterson had been involved for 14 months. It had begun, as these things apparently often do, gradually and then all at once. A working relationship that had grown into friendship, that had grown into something she described as complicated, in a way that I found deeply unsatisfying as a description. She said she had been unhappy. She said she had felt unseen. She said that none of that was my fault, but that she needed me to understand the context. I listened to all of it. I asked very few questions. I already had the only answer that truly mattered, which was that for 14 months, my wife had been building an entirely different life alongside the one we shared, and I had been the last to know. The resignation letter, it turned out, had been her attempt to end the affair. She had written it the night before as a kind of gesture, a breaking point, the moment where she tried to sever the professional connection that had made the personal one so easy to maintain. She had been planning to deliver it herself. When the migraine arrived and I offered to go in her place, she had said yes without thinking through what that might mean. Or perhaps, somewhere underneath the conscious decision, she had thought it through very well indeed. I spent a great deal of time in the months after that examining that particular question. Had she wanted to be caught? Had sending me to that house been an act of self-sabotage or self-liberation, or something she genuinely had not anticipated? I never arrived at a satisfying conclusion. Human beings are not simple enough to have clean, singular motives for the things they do, especially the things that change everything. We saw a couples counselor for a period of about 3 months. A quiet, measured woman named Dr. Holloway, who had an office full of plants and a gift for asking questions that opened things up rather than closing them down. I will say that those sessions were not without value. They helped me understand certain things about Claire, that I had perhaps chosen not to see during our marriage, her restlessness, her hunger for a kind of intensity that our comfortable and companionable life had not always provided. They helped Claire understand certain things about herself that she had been avoiding. But understanding is not the same as healing, and healing is not the same as restoration, and restoration was not, in the end, something either of us was fully able to choose. We separated 8 months after that, Tuesday morning. The separation was quiet and, in its way, civil. We divided our belongings without too much bitterness. She found an apartment across the city. I kept the house for a while, then sold it because it had become a building full of wrong-feeling rooms. I am writing this down now because I think there is something important in the particular details of it, not the drama of what happened, because betrayal has a kind of terrible sameness to it once you have lived through it. Everyone's version of this story contains the same essential wound. What I think is worth capturing is the specificity of the moment. The cream envelope in my hand, the drawn curtains, the oak trees dropping their leaves, the dog that had stopped barking, the way my name sounded in her mouth when she ran out of everything else to say. There is a thing that happens when your understanding of your own life is suddenly, violently revised. The past does not disappear. It remains exactly where it was, but its meaning changes entirely. Every moment that had felt simple and ordinary and true is suddenly subject to reinterpretation. That drive we took up the coast 2 summers ago, her laughing in the passenger seat with her sunglasses pushed up on her head. Was she happy then? Was she already someone else by then? You go back through the archive of your shared life, like a detective revisiting a crime scene, and you search for the evidence you missed, and you find it, and finding it does not help as much as you hoped it would. What I learned, and what I am still learning, is that you cannot rebuild your understanding of the past. It is gone, and it is fixed, and it is what it is. What you can do is choose what to carry forward. You can carry the bitterness, and it will keep you company in a way, because bitterness is warm, and it tells you that you were right, and that you were wronged, and that the world is a treacherous place, full of people who will hurt you. Or you can set it down somewhere, not all at once, but incrementally, the way you unpack a heavy bag after a long journey. You set down one thing, and then another, and then another, and eventually the bag is lighter, and then one day you realize you're not carrying it anymore. I am not there yet. I want to be honest about that too. There are still days when I drive past a particular kind of neighborhood, with wide front porches and oak trees and the quiet of a Tuesday morning, and something clenches in my chest that takes a while to release. There are still nights when I lie awake running through the architecture of those 14 months, trying to find the structural flaw I should have noticed, the crack in the foundation that I walked past every day without looking down. But I am further along than I was, and I think, when I look back at the man standing on that doorstep with an envelope in his hand, I can feel something approaching compassion for him. He was trying to do a kind thing for someone he loved. He was not a fool. He was a person who had chosen to extend trust for as long as trust was possible, and in the end, the cost of that choice was paid in a single, clarifying moment when a door opened and the world rearranged itself entirely. That is, I suppose, how these things happen. Not slowly, and not with warning. A door opens, and someone you thought you knew is standing on the other side of it, and nothing is ever quite the same again. The leaves were falling, and the dog had stopped barking, and I drove home alone through the quiet streets of a Tuesday morning that had begun as any other, and did not end that way at all.